Imagine a crowd gathered in total silence, every breath held, every gaze fixed on two men facing each other. No army stand behind them, no cavalry ready to charge, just two warriors, stripped down to raw courage, honor, and steel. One will walk away with glory. The other will fall, his fate sealed by the sharp edge of his opponent's blade. These weren't just brawls or tavern fights. They were life and death struggles that could decide inheritance, power, or even justice itself. This was the heart of medieval one-on-one combat. Fights so intense that their echoes still shake us centuries later. One of the most unforgettable duels took place in France in 1386, when Jean de Carouges and Jacques Legris stood ready to fight for their honor. Jean, a knight, had accused Jacques, his former ally and friend, of committing an unthinkable crime against his wife. In those days, justice didn't end in courtrooms. It was sometimes settled with steel. Before the king, the nobles, and an anxious crowd, the two men rode into combat. Blow after blow clashed as the audience roared, each strike carrying the weight of truth or lies. In the end, Carouges delivered a final, fatal strike to Legris, proving his case in the eyes of God and man. Imagine the tension of watching that fight, knowing that the outcome determined not only the truth of crime, but also the honor of family for generations. But France wasn't the only land where honor was defended blade to blade. Travel north into the icy landscapes of medieval Iceland, and you find tales of duels recorded in the sagas. One such story tells of Halder and Thorbjorn, two men whose pride and reputations collided like crashing waves. Words have been exchanged, insults too deep to forgive, and there was only one way to settle it: a duel. They stood in a circle, weapons raised, and struck with a fury born from ancient tradition. To them, it wasn't simply about survival. It was about proving worth in a culture where honor meant more than life itself. These sagas show us how cold and unforgiving justice could be in a Viking world, where one wrong word could lead to a duel in which only blood could decide who was right. Not all duels are remembered for their realism. Some linger in the realm of legend. English tales tell us of Sir Guy of Warwick, a knight who supposedly faced a fearsome giant named Colbrand. Whether myth or embellished memory, the story reveals how medieval people romanticized these one-on-one battles, turning them into epic tales of good versus evil. Sir Guy, armed with courage and the blessing of God, is said to have slain the giant in single combat, saving his people from destruction. Did this really happen? Probably not in the way it's told, but the fact that people believe it shows how deeply one-on-one combat stirred the imagination of the medieval mind. Sometimes, these duels were not just between two men, but carried the weight of entire nations. Picture the year 1351, during the chaos of the 100 Years' War. On one side stood the French, on the other the English. Rather than fight with entire armies, 30 warriors from each side stepped forward to settle matters in an infamous fight later called the Combat of 30. Among the fighters was a Scottish champion known as Hal o' the Wynd. The men clashed with brutal determination, axes, swords, and maces cutting through armor, turning the battlefield into a storm of blood and iron. Though 30 fought on each side, the duels within were as raw and personal as any one-on-one. National pride was at stake, and every swing of a sword echoed the fate of kingdoms. Now pause for a moment and imagine yourself in those shoes. Would you step forward alone to defend your honor, knowing every eye was on you, knowing one mistake meant death? Could you bear the weight of family, land, and pride, all resting on the strength of your arm and the steadiness of your heart? In a time when reputation was everything, some had no choice but to fight. That's what makes these duels unforgettable. Not just the violence, but the courage to face another human being without any shield of numbers or allies. Yet, not every medieval battle was fought with weapons. In the shimmering courts of Elizabethan England, power and rivalry unfolded in a very different way, through fashion. Imagine entering the court of Queen Elizabeth I, where colors sparkled brighter than jewels, where a dress could silence a room, and where the cut of man's doublet could elevate his status or bring whispers behind his back. Clothing wasn't simply fabric stitched together. It was armor of a different kind, armor made of silk, pearls, and gold. The Elizabethan court was a theater of appearances, and every noble was an actor on that stage. The higher the collar on your ruff, the greater the respect you demanded. Imagine balancing a massive, starched, circular collar around your neck, so stiff and wide you could barely turn your head. It wasn't practical, but practicality wasn't the point. The point was to announce, I have wealth, I have status, and I belong in the presence of the Queen. Queen Elizabeth herself mastered this art like no one else. Her gowns weren't just clothes. They were statements. Each one was stitched with pearls to symbolize purity, with rich embroidery that told stories of power and divine right. When she appeared, draped in white lead makeup and crowned in golden fabrics, she wasn't just a ruler. She was a living image of authority, untouchable and immortal in the eyes of her people. Every outfit was chosen carefully, not just to impress, but to intimidate, to remind the world she was both woman and monarch, both human and larger than life. Men, too, had their own form of fashion battles. Their doublets were cut tight, their breeches puffed out, and swords hung at their sides, not always for use but for show. To appear at court without the right outfit was to invite humiliation, and in an age where reputation could make or break a man, humiliation was worse than defeat in battle. Clothes became weapons, and every noble knew how to wield them. But this pursuit of beauty came with a darker cost. The pale, ghostly look of Elizabethan women wasn't natural. It was painted on with a toxic mixture of lead and vinegar, a concoction that ate away at their skin even as it made them appear angelic under candlelight. Hair was dyed with dangerous chemicals, skin powdered until pores could hardly breathe. To be beautiful, to be admired, was to sacrifice one's health for the sake of appearance. Imagine painting your face with poison every morning just to be accepted at court. Still, the allure was irresistible. Power in the Elizabethan world wasn't always won on the battlefield. It was won in the audience chamber, the banquet hall, the moment you caught the Queen's eye in the glitter of candlelight. A dress could open doors, a ruff could silence rivals, a jewel-encrusted doublet could secure alliances. Fashion was a duel in its own right, one fought not with swords but with fabric, one that demanded as much cunning and courage as any fight in the lists. And so, when we think of medieval times, we must remember, the battlefield wasn't the only place where honor was tested. Whether in a clash of steel on a dueling ground or the shimmer of silk in a royal court, survival depended on courage, wit, and the ability to face challenges alone. Some fought with swords, some fought with fabric, but all fought for the same thing: power, respect, and a legacy that would outlive them. Childbirth in the Middle Ages was a moment of both hope and dread. For families, it promised new life. But for women, it meant facing death more closely than any battlefield ever could. Without modern medicine, childbirth was unpredictable, and people sought meaning and safety through superstitions, rituals, and prayers. Imagine a world where every craving, every dream, every strange sign in nature was believed to shape the fate of the child and the life of the mother. Pregnancy was never just a biological process. It was surrounded by mystery and fear. It was widely believed that what a pregnant woman saw or experienced would directly affect her baby. If she gazed too long at an animal, people thought her child might be born with features resembling it. If she looked at someone with a deformity, it was said the child would inherit the same flaw. Even sudden frights were considered dangerous. A thunderclap, a violent quarrel, or a terrifying sight could mark the unborn child forever. These beliefs made pregnancy a time of constant caution, where even the most ordinary daily moment could feel like destiny being written. Food cravings carried their own set of meanings. If a woman longed for strawberries, it was thought her child would bear red birthmarks. Eating certain herbs was said to strengthen the baby, while other foods were believed to bring weakness or even curses. Families often went to great lengths to provide what the mother desired, fearing that denial might harm both child and mother. In a world where so much was beyond their control, these superstitions gave people a fragile sense of power over the unknown. Amulets and charms were another shield against danger. A woman might wear a religious relic around her neck, perhaps a tiny piece of a saint's clothing or a small cross blessed by a priest. Some carried herbs like rue or mugwort, believed to ward off evil spirits. Others pinned written prayers onto their clothing, hoping holy words would protect both mother and child from the invisible threats that hovered over childbirth. These objects offered comfort in an age when fear of demons and curses was very real. Midwives stood at the center of this world of belief. They were women of experience, often trusted and respected in their communities, but also feared. People whispered that their knowledge of herbs and childbirth bordered on witchcraft. A successful delivery brought praise, but if tragedy struck, suspicion could quickly turn into accusation. Were they healers, or were they servants of darker powers? For many women, the midwife was both their greatest hope and their greatest risk, the one who stood between them and death in the most perilous hours of their lives. Labor itself was surrounded by rituals. Women in labor were sometimes given special drinks infused with herbs and blessed by priests. Prayers to the Virgin Mary were recited, and holy candles were lit to guide the child safely into the world. Yet if the birth went badly, people often blamed unseen forces. A difficult delivery could be seen as punishment for sins, a curse from an enemy, or even the work of demons who sought to claim the mother or child. Imagine the terror of not only fearing for your life, but also being told that your suffering was a result of supernatural judgment. Omens shaped expectations as well. If a raven was seen near the home, it was a bad sign. If a cat meowed in a certain way, it could mean death was near. The position of the moon or the time of birth might be used to predict the child's fate. Was the child born under a waxing moon? Then fortune might await them. Was it under a waning moon? Then hardship was thought to lie ahead. Every detail, no matter how small, was loaded with meaning. Superstition did not end at birth. The newborn, fragile and tiny, was believed to be vulnerable to evil. People rushed to baptize infants as soon as possible, fearing that an unbaptized child who died would be lost forever. Mothers were warned not to leave their babies unattended, for it was thought that fairies or demons might snatch them away and replace them with changelings. The struggle to protect life was constant, and superstition became a way of fighting back against the invisible dangers that lurked in every shadow. But once a woman survived the ordeal of childbirth, her journey was not yet over. She still had to undergo a ritual that marked her return to society, the ceremony known as churching. Today it might sound strange, but in the Middle Ages, it was a deeply significant rite, one that carried layers of meaning about faith, purity, and the place of women in the community. After giving birth, a woman was considered spiritually unclean, not because she had done anything wrong, but because childbirth was linked to blood, danger, and the ancient traditions of purification. She was expected to remain apart from the community's religious life until she underwent the ceremony. For weeks, sometimes even longer, she lived in a kind of limbo, focused on recovery, nursing her child, and preparing for her formal return to the church. When the time came, the woman would dress modestly and bring a small offering, perhaps candles, bread, or coins. She would enter the church, often quietly, and kneel as the priest blessed her. Words of purification were spoken, prayers of thanksgiving offered, and with that, she was welcomed back into the spiritual fold. It was not just about her. It was about restoring the balance between her family, and her community. For some women, churching was a moment of joy and gratitude. Surviving childbirth was no small feat in an age when death was common. To walk into the church again, alive and carrying a child, was cause for celebration. The blessing was a reminder that she had endured and triumphed. For others, however, it was more complicated. To be labeled as unclean, even temporarily, could feel like a burden, a mark of shame placed on the very act of bringing life into the world. The ritual carried both empowerment and stigma, depending on how it was experienced. The churching of women also reinforced the power of the church over the most intimate parts of life. Birth was not just a family matter. It was seen as something that required spiritual oversight. By blessing the woman and officially welcoming her back, the church claimed authority over the cycle of life itself. From birth to marriage to death, every step was framed by ritual, ensuring that faith and community were always present. Yet despite the restrictions, many women found meaning in the ritual. It was a chance to step out of the shadow of fear, to reclaim their place in society after weeks of seclusion. It marked survival, renewal, and continuity, even if it also reminded them of the dangers they had faced. For a medieval mother, churching was both an ending and a beginning, the closing of one chapter of risk and the opening of another as she raised her child under the gaze of both community and God. Together, the superstitions of pregnancy and the ritual of churching paint a vivid picture of how deeply medieval life was tied to faith, fear, and tradition. In every stage, From the first signs of pregnancy to the return to the church after birth, women carried not only the weight of new life, but also the expectations of a world that saw the sacred and the dangerous in every moment. Their lives were surrounded by mystery and ritual, by hope and dread, by the constant effort to find meaning in the face of uncertainty.